the Saab JAS-39. Gripen was never meant to be just another fighter jet. On paper, it was Sweden's answer to the world's superpowers, an affordable, versatile, lightweight multi-role fighter that could stand toe-to-toe with the likes of the F-16, the Eurofighter, and even the mighty F-35. But behind the sleek design and the promises of efficiency lies a story that almost no one dares to tell. A secret so dark, so shocking, that it pushed the limits of human courage and nearly destroyed everything Sweden had worked for. The Gripen project began in the 1970s, born out of Sweden's ambition to protect its sovereignty without depending on NATO or foreign suppliers. It was a dream wrapped in national pride, a jet that would be cheaper, faster, and deadlier than anything its rivals could offer. But what engineers and politicians didn't anticipate was the hidden cost of perfection. Every line of code, every bolt, every piece of software carried with it the weight of an untested vision. The Gripen wasn't just a machine, it was a gamble with lives. By the early 1980s, the development was already plagued with problems. Costs spiraled out of control, deadlines slipped, and whispers of corruption filled the corridors of power. But the darkest chapter was yet to unfold. When the first prototypes were rolled out, they promised glory. Instead, they delivered terror. On February 2, 1989, in front of live cameras, the pride of Sweden lifted into the air for a routine test flight. For a few brief minutes, everything seemed perfect. But then, suddenly, uncontrollably, the jet bucked like a wild animal. The computer system seized control from the pilot, forcing the Gripen into a death spiral. The test pilot fought with every ounce of strength, every ounce of training, until the inevitable came. The jet smashed into the ground in a fireball of steel and flames. The world was stunned. Sweden was humiliated. And yet, that was only the beginning, because what investigators uncovered was far worse than a simple mechanical failure. Buried in the Gripen's advanced fly-by-wire system was a deadly flaw. The software meant to stabilize the jet had turned against the very men flying it. Gripen was supposed to be the future, but in truth, it had become a coffin with wings. For the pilots, every flight became an act of raw courage. They were asked to climb into a machine they no longer trusted, a machine that could betray them at any moment. Some compared it to taming a wild predator, knowing full well that the beast might strike back. And yet, out of duty, out of honor, they strapped themselves in again and again, gambling with death for the sake of their country. But the secret didn't stop there. Behind closed doors, officials debated whether the Gripen program should be buried forever. Billions had been poured into it. Political reputations were at stake, and Sweden's independence hung in the balance. To admit defeat would mean national disgrace. To press on meant risking more lives. And so, a chilling decision was made. The Gripen project would continue no matter the cost. The pilots were never told the full truth. They became human test subjects, flying on the edge of disaster, while the engineers worked desperately to patch the nightmare lurking inside the jet's brain. The tragedy repeated itself again in 1993, this time in the heart of Stockholm, during a public air show. In front of thousands of horrified spectators, another Gripen lost control, twisting violently before slamming into the earth. Fire and smoke engulfed the crowd, and panic swept through the city. The image of Sweden's ultimate pride turned into a symbol of fear. Once again, the pilot survived only by the narrowest margin, ejecting in the last seconds. But this wasn't survival. It was a warning, a message written in fire. The Gripen's darkest secret was real, and it could not be hidden forever. This was the point where the myth shattered. Sweden's dream fighter had become its nightmare. And yet, despite everything, the Gripen would rise again. But the price of that resurrection would demand even more than money, technology, or politics. It would demand something no machine could ever calculate: human courage pushed beyond its limits. To understand how the Gripen survived its own curse, we must descend even deeper into the shadows, where loyalty, fear, and sacrifice collided in ways the world was never supposed to see. After the flames of Stockholm, the Gripen project should have been buried once and for all. But what happened next was nothing short of extraordinary and terrifying. Instead of shutting it down, Sweden doubled down. Engineers worked around the clock, rewriting millions of lines of code, redesigning flight systems, and pouring endless resources into taming the beast. But what few outsiders knew was that every fix was tested not in labs, but in the skies, by pilots who knew that any mistake would mean certain death. These were not just test pilots. They were men standing at the edge of human courage, walking into cockpits that might become coffins. Every time the canopy sealed shut, they were gambling with fate. One wrong flicker of code, one invisible glitch, and the Gripen would seize control, dragging them down into the abyss. And yet, flight after flight, they returned, scarred, shaken, but alive. What fueled them was not just duty, but something far darker: the knowledge that if they failed, Sweden's independence would crumble, and their sacrifices would mean nothing. The deeper engineers dug, the more chilling the truth became. The Gripen's instability was not an accident. It was by design. To achieve unmatched maneuverability, the jet had been built deliberately unstable, relying on computers to keep it in the air. It was a brilliant gamble on paper, but in reality, it meant that without flawless software, the jet was uncontrollable. Gripen wasn't just a fighter, it was a predator chained only by fragile code. And every flight was a test of whether the chains would hold or snap. As the years dragged on, whispers spread among the pilots. Some swore that the jet had a mind of its own, reacting in ways no one could predict. Others described the eerie silence before disaster, the moment when the controls froze, and death itself seemed to whisper in their ears. Yet through sheer willpower, through a brotherhood of courage, they pressed on. Their sacrifices carved a path through fire and fear, forcing the Gripen to evolve. Slowly, piece by piece, the beast was tamed. By the late 1990s, the software had been refined, the control systems hardened, and the crashes stopped. Against all odds, Gripen transformed from a cursed machine into one of the most reliable, efficient, and deadly fighters in the world. It was exported to nations across the globe, hailed as a miracle of engineering, a symbol of innovation and power. But beneath the praise, the truth remained buried: the blood, the terror, and the sacrifices that had forged it. And this is the darkest secret of all. The Gripen's success was not born of perfection, but of failure. It was not built on technology alone, but on the courage of men who faced death again and again, so that others could fly in safety. Its wings carry the memory of fireballs, of broken metal, of pilots who stared into the abyss and refused to look away. The world sees a fighter jet, but the pilots who tamed it know the truth. The Gripen is a monument to human courage, built on the shattered limits of fear. Today, the Gripen soars across the skies as a symbol of resilience, but every time it takes off, it carries with it the shadows of its past. shadows that whisper of the crashes that were hidden, the sacrifices that were silenced, and the courage that no machine can ever repay. The Gripen's darkest secret is not just about technology, it is about the human spirit pushed to its breaking point and the haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are born from the deepest scars. This is the untold story. This is the legend that was never meant to be revealed. And this is the Gripen Jet's darkest secret.